Hello everybody, good evening. I'm James. On behalf of South Gippsland Shire Council and the Community Recovery Working Group, I'd like to welcome you all here and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. For your information, we are recording the session tonight for people who aren't able to get here, so we'll be sharing that later on so that other people in Mirboo North can experience some of the wise words from Rob Gordon as he talks us through the recovery process. I'd like to thank Brian and his team for recording tonight, and also for Red Cross, Victorian Council of Churches, Windermere and Gippsland Lakes for being here tonight. Please do go and speak to those agencies. They are there with lots of information that can help you through the recovery process. Tonight we have an amazing guest speaker, Rob Gordon, who will share his insights into practical and emotional responses after events such as those experienced here on the 13th of February. Rob is a clinical psychologist and has worked with people in communities throughout Australia and New Zealand after traumatic events such as storms, bushfires and floods for over 30 years. Rob will provide some practical steps to help you plan a way through the recovery journey for yourself and your families. There will be an opportunity for questions at the end, and I'll hand over to Rob. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks very much, James. Good evening, everyone. I got a little glimpse as I drove in of the shredded trees, not the trees lying blown down, as I've been hearing about. Had you ever imagined anything like that could happen? When something like that happens, it completely disrupts your frame of reference, your expectations, your assumptions about everything, nature, trees, and so on, doesn't it? And I want to just talk a little bit about how that sets a series of processes going for us. Because don't we normally try and organise our lives in a predictable, routine way so that we know where our pyjamas are kept, for example? We know what's going to happen tomorrow. We know how to get to work, and so on. One of the really important things about disasters that I've learned over the years is the element of disruption, the way it disrupts our lives in multiple ways. The problem is we probably, if our lives were working reasonably well, didn't actually realise the routines and the patterns that we'd formed, because we just form them gradually, don't we? Just, get things working. Get our morning routine working so we can get our breakfast in and so on and get off to work. And then suddenly nothing works. That's one of the big factors I'm going to talk about. But I want to start off with probably the thing that was uppermost in your minds initially, and that is you have an absolutely unprecedented and very dangerous event. I wonder how many people thought that they might die during this event. And I've worked with the people in Dandenong storm. It's so interesting how different the storms are. You had this whiteout and the hail. They didn't have that. They had a swirling wind that made the big trees go round and round and round, and they knew they were going to go, but they didn't know where and when and in what direction. Then the other storm out in the Trentham Way, a different part of the same storm. Again, 80% of the trees were knocked down in their state forests there. But each disaster is, in a way, absolutely unique. In another way, they're all the same. Whether they're fires, floods, bushfires or windstorms, there are certain fundamentals. The first one is this thing of the disruption of our routines of life. The second one is this trauma element. Now, I want to speak a little bit about the trauma, because then we can talk about the recovery aspect. Now, I'm not here to talk about logistics and funding and timelines and all that. I'm only a psychologist. I'm only here to talk about what happens up here. But that's what counts. How we view the things that are happening. How we adapt ourselves to the things we can't change. That's what's crucial. The word trauma in Greek, our scientific words often come from Greek or Latin, but medicine, they come from Greek. Trauma means wound, damage, injury. And when we talk about psychological trauma, we mean a damage or injury to my psychological system, the way in which I process information, come to terms with the world, make decisions, manage myself. It's injured. Now, an injury can recover, can't it? We can heal. Or if we don't take care, for instance, I once had a colleague who broke her arm and it wasn't set properly, and when she held it out like that, it was like that. It healed up all right, but wrong. Didn't work properly. And it's the same with psychological trauma. We have to give them attention to ensure they heal. A trauma is injury to, I think fundamentally, the frame of reference we have for our lives, the framework, the assumptions, the things we take for granted. They provide us with our stability, our security, don't they? Now, have you noticed, I don't know what it's been like up here, but down in the Yarra Valley where I live, it's been very still, hardly any wind. Has it been like that up here? I bet you're relieved. Did you get the heebie-jeebies when there's a bit of wind around? Because this time last year it wouldn't have worried you, would it? Because you had assumptions about wind that said, I don't have to worry about it. Maybe we'll fly a kite. But now all those assumptions gone out the window and you've got to stop and think, what kind of wind is this? Where's it coming from? What's going to happen next? Oh, well, it's okay, all the trees have been knocked down. It shouldn't be a problem. You're going to have to go through something. I worked in a Christchurch earthquake with people. Every time, even 4 years later, this was the last time I went, every time a quarry truck went past and there was a bit of rumbling, they tuned straight in. What's that? What's that? Is it a truck? Or is it an earthquake? Truck? Earthquake? It's only a truck. It's okay. I can relax. Because the traumatic experience becomes imprinted in our minds. Any of the sensory features of it. The sounds, the atmosphere, whatever features, the whiteout, maybe the sound of, I understand you didn't know anything, a lot of you didn't know what had happened because there was so much noise from the storm. And that's very unusual because in the Dandenong, they could hear these trees groaning and screeching and groaning and then crash and then another one crash. So they were actually waiting for it to fall on their house. Very different experience to what I heard from some people this afternoon where you went through this incredible noise, you had no idea what had happened, and you walked outside and you saw everything lying on the ground. Very different. What's common though is this sense, has the world gone crazy? Everything I assumed was stable and secure is gone. Now, the recovery process is to rebuild those assumptions. Can you see? So, because this is a very, very unusual event. There's a few, what shall I say, mature people here who have you lived here for a long time, some of you? Have you ever had something like this happen before? That's what a disaster is. Something very, very unusual. And the recovery process is to rebuild a sense of how unusual that is so that we can actually relax the rest of the time. And that's a journey. When we have a very threatening experience, there are instinctive mechanisms in our brain and our body that fire us up to deal with it. Did you notice that? You just go into adrenaline. Adrenaline's the chemical that just fires us all up. And we don't ask, what do we have to do or whatever, or how tired am I? You just do it. And if people are not careful, they'll go on until they drop. But the important thing about that adrenaline state is that in order to do that, you shut down a lot of your own reactions. You shut down the feedback system that tells you whether you're scared or angry or frightened or exhausted or hungry or cold or tired or whatever, and you just do what you have to do. And I could tell you many stories of what people do under adrenaline. And the real thought is, well, let me tell you a story of, I heard in Black Saturday a woman walked her father, an elderly father who was injured by the fire, over the Black Spur down into Healesville. And she checked him in and he needed a lot of care. And only when she'd sorted him all out and finished that did she become aware that her back was hurting like hell. She had a really serious burn on her back. She didn't feel it until she'd done the job. So the essence, that's a dramatic example. The essence of adrenaline, though, is that when we stay in that state, we don't look after ourselves. We do what's required to be done. Now, that's a great advantage for survival, isn't it? And people run on broken legs, and I could tell you a man who carried his wife out of the tsunami and realised afterwards he'd broken his ankle. Probably made a mess of his ankle, didn't he? Walk around on it with his wife. If we're not careful and we don't come out of that adrenaline state, we don't take care of ourselves and we use ourselves up. We mightn't have a broken ankle, but we get exhausted. Now, I've noticed over the years a pattern. My first fire was Ash Wednesday, and we used to meet in the GP's rooms every Friday morning. And we'd just go around the room and all the different people from the different agencies would tell their stories, what's going on this week, etc. And I remember after, a month or two, people said, oh, well, things are more or less settled. And I remember the GP saying, well, I think we're just about over this. And then a week later he said, the whole place has gone mad. We've got people having chainsaw accidents and they're bickering and fighting and they're getting sick and my waiting room is full of unhappy people the whole time. What's going on? And what you realise, if you had that opportunity to sort of monitor get everyone together and monitor the community, we don't often have that. You see this sort of cyclic process where everyone's having a big problem, then they settle down. Probably they're all exhausted and staying home a bit and not doing their chainsaws. And then they get out with their chainsaws, but they're actually too tired to be using the chainsaws, so they have an accident. You guys wouldn't do that, of course, but it's actually very important. Now, what I noticed was that a really important time is around about the 6-month mark. And I don't get much time to read research, but when I do get time to read research, what you see is this 6-month mark comes up again and again and again as a period of great difficulty. I went to a conference and a group of the counsellors that ran the New York counselling service after September 11 put up the statistics of their referrals. And it goes like this and then comes down, and the 6-month mark comes up, and then goes down. At the anniversary it comes up, and then it goes down. 18 months, 2 years. A rhythm. Now I kept asking myself, because I kept picking this up, so much so that I tend to say to anyone who'll listen early on, watch out for the 6-month mark. Prepare for the 6-month mark. And I asked myself, why is it? Because I reckon most reasonably healthy people can probably go in overdrive for about 6 months before something gives. Now, If you've got a lot of other problems on your plate, you won't last that long. If you've just been on a long holiday overseas, you've got plenty of money, no worries in the world, and you're looking for a new interest in your life, you'll probably go 8 or 10 months, won't you? This really interesting problem of community recovery. But most of us were already busy, weren't we, and tired before it happened? Or do you have a nice rural paradise down here? No. You're already tired, and your lives are already full up, aren't they? And then this happens. And so, round about now is a good time to talk to people. You're halfway through that first 6 months, just a little over, aren't you? And I think it's really important to anticipate what's to come. Unfortunately, it's going to take a long time. It must, because the systems aren't geared up to do very intense work. The insurance companies are not geared up to be able to process all the claims very quickly and so on. And when it comes to trying to get building approvals through the council, it's going to take a long time. And of course, everyone's frustrated. Why should it be? No. We all go into a disaster with false expectations because our expectations are based on normal business. How long does it take to get a building approval under normal circumstances? But suddenly, they've got thousands of them. Insurance companies have got thousands of claims. So it doesn't matter how much we get angry and complain and say we need this fast. It's not going to happen. And therefore, we can actually make things better by actually saying, how do I look after myself and my life and my family during this period of enormous disruption? Because what adrenaline wants you to do is forget everything else and focus on the problem. That's why it's such a good mechanism for survival. It'll make you very narrowly focused. There's been research on adrenaline going back to the 50s. And in those days, they were not bothered with ethics committees for their research. They'd just get a bunch of psychology students and they'd have them do some experiments and then give them all an injection of adrenaline and ask them to do the experiments again. Probably the same needle in those days. And what you find is that once they hit the adrenaline, so they've got a display of lights, and most of the information's in the middle of the display. They've got to press this button if it's that display and that button if it's another display and so on. But there's very important lights on the periphery which they've got to take notice of to get it right. As the adrenaline kicks in, they just focus in where most of the information is and they just start jumping to conclusions. They start to make very systematic and predictable errors because they're only looking at the most obvious problems. Now, if you've just trodden on a snake, do you notice how sensitive you are to black crooked sticks in the vicinity for the next few weeks? And you don't just say, oh, that reminds me of the snake I nearly trodden on. No, you levitate into the nearest tree or something, don't you? You just go into action. That's why adrenaline is so helpful for survival. But it creates this very fast focus on the most obvious problems. And to do that, we make very simple black and white judgments. Is that a snake or not? It's long and black, it must be, so I'm reacting. Now, that'll happen when the wind blows. There'll have to be a storm eventually, won't there? Right? I'm looking at these big high pressures rolling across, but it's going to come. And when that happens, and you hear those noises again, groaning in the trees and so on, whatever it is, the real question is, do you then go and have a massive anxiety attack? You've got to start working with the experience to re-establish the normality that was a very unusual event, hopefully. But, we don't know, do we? But hopefully it's a very unusual event. I'm going to assume it is. I was talking out at a little town in the Grampians. I'll think of it, Halls Gap, right? Around about this time of the year, and they'd had flash floods out there, in the floods of 2011, perhaps. And there was this nice little group of people, a bit smaller than this, and rain started to tinkle on the roof. And there was a woman sitting about 3 rows back, and I noticed she had tears running down. Now, if I'm giving a talk and I notice someone's weeping, I think, my God, have I said something tactless? Is this my fault? So I said, excuse me, have I said something to upset you? She said, no, it's just the rain. I always cry when it rains. Go on. So I went on. Afterwards, I heard her story. She's lived for 20 years in a little valley up in the Grampians. And on this occasion, she went to her back doorstep. Now, remember, prior to that, we'd had tsunamis. She went to the back doorstep and she said what she saw, what she described as a tsunami, halfway up the gum trees, roaring down the valley towards her house. Now, she wouldn't know how the terrain is going to go with the water. It's never happened before. So what flashed through her mind is, I'm dead. I'm not going to survive this. This is where the images of the tsunami are very unhelpful. In the event, the water lapped up against her back doorstep and then went on down the valley, because that's the way the valley geography was. But here's an important point. I've learnt that the trauma is not what happened, it's what you think is going to happen, because that's what you get psychologically ready for. And if you think that is, I'm going to die, then something profoundly life-changing has happened, whether or not it occurs. Right? Now, nothing dangerous physically happened to her, but she thought she was going to die. Now she cries whenever it rains. So what happens? Why does she cry? Because she has a terrible experience. We say she's re-experiencing the horror that she had from the initial experience. Now that's like opening the wound, isn't it? And if you open the wound regularly, it doesn't heal. Did you ever have one of those sort of sprains of the ankle and you keep spraining it again? And eventually you get a really nasty injury, even though you just keep rolling it because it didn't get properly cared for in the first place. That's post-traumatic stress disorder that we hear so much about. It's usually related to the fact that people don't get the support to work with the experience in the proper way. I said to her, you're going to have to become a meteorologist. A what? A meteorologist. She's going to have to really examine the weather map. Now, I don't know what the circumstances here. There must be interesting weather maps about this event. I wonder if they were predicted by any of the weather people. In that state, we had a decaying cyclone coming down from Broome and a decaying cyclone coming down from Cairns. And you could see these huge cloud bands that crossed like an X over central Victoria, and they dumped all their rain. That's why it was such a bad and unpredicted flood. Very unusual pattern. Now, I said, if you just see those rain bands rolling across from Western Australia, when life used to be predictable back in those days, you don't have to worry about it. It's not going to be the sort of event that caused this huge flood. Can you see what I mean? Now, what she's doing is she's actually talking to herself, isn't she? Because when you're in that adrenaline mode, let's call it your reptile brain, the very instinctive, deep-seated part of your brain, part of our brain that we share with crocodiles and sharks, right? All the superstructure is the human part of it. is up the top, and down in behind the eyes is this instinctive reptile brain. That's the part that sees the snake and causes you to jump before you've even used the word snake. But that's where the trauma sits, deep down in there. And when I work with people's trauma, they'll say, I know it's not true, but I still react. The man who was involved in a shooting says even years later, if he's in a cafe and somebody drops a coffee cup or a car backfires, he's getting ready to die. And he'll laugh and he'll say, I know it's not reasonable, but it happens. I can't stop it. It's like, now, we have to connect up, which is by saying, I know what's going on here. I don't need to get upset. It's okay. I can calm down. So you'll need to work out what is the sound of ordinary wind. You'll know what it is, won't you? Which direction it comes and so on. But I think it's really helpful to get hold of the details of that experience from the weather side of it. And you'll have to talk to yourself to normalise the normal thing. Otherwise, you'll keep opening the wound, won't you, every time the wind blows. And then you want to go and live in Queensland until there's a cyclone. But people sometimes do go to Queensland to escape Victorian disasters. But it's work, right? It takes time, months, maybe even a year or two. Actually, I live in Yarra Glen, and the whole of Yarra Glen was surrounded by fire on Black Saturday. And luckily, the wind changed before it went over our place. Otherwise, I mightn't be here. Now, there was a very strong northerly wind blowing that day. And we have a line of trees on our northern boundary. And it took about 3 to 4 years before I wouldn't feel agitated when there was a blustery north wind tossing those trees around, even in the winter with drizzle on it. After about 4 years, I think that's okay, it's just a north wind. You know, so up until then I just don't feel comfortable. It takes time. That's one of the recovery processes. And if we go back to that idea, what did you think was going to happen? That's what's traumatic about it, that she thinks she's going to die. What she's got to do is to process that, to say, I thought I was going to die, but look at the terrain, look at the shape. It's all spread out. It wasn't so dangerous. It'd have to be the top of the trees, and so on. So it's really important to talk through what happened, what your experience was on that day. Here's another reason why. When you go through a bad experience, it's initially stored in your memory the way you experience this. Images, sounds, sensations, emotions. But they're distorted because there's adrenaline involved. And they're also incomplete. And what you will find is, if somebody talks about their traumatic experience, they'll tell you the story and they'll be very excited and maybe agitated as they tell the story, and they'll reach a certain point of danger and then they'll pause. When I went down to Malakuta fairly soon after the fires there, people kept telling me this young man who was in the CFA, and his house is on the edge of the forest, and when the fire was coming, he went out to protect his house, and the fire came out of the forest and it was so huge he thought he was going to die. He's very traumatised. Have you seen him? You should talk to him. Now, about 6 people talked about that young man. Now, what don't we know? We don't know how he survived, do we? That's not reported. What's reported is the danger and how worried they are about him. Nobody ever told me why he didn't die. He thought he was going to die, but he obviously didn't. Why didn't he die? Was it not as bad as they thought? Did he have protective CFA gear on and make good decisions? Did he run around the other side of the house and wait until a fire front had passed? He must have done something, but it's not in the story, is it? So all of the information goes to this great crescendo, oh my God, he's going to die. And that's it. And then you go into emotion. So when you listen to each other, it's very predictable. I call it the ad break. You know, on TV, you have an ad break when it's very exciting, so that you'll watch the ads and wait to see what happened. Well, when you hear that ad break and the person disrupts, now to hold that, you don't go with them, because usually in that ad break they'll shift from the sequence to how angry they are. In bushfires, that the CFA didn't do more burning off, or you could actually say, well, we've been telling the council, I blame James all the time, that we should need those trees cut down, and they've never done it, and so on and so forth. It's very tempting to convert all of that traumatic anxiety into blame. But it doesn't get us anywhere, because they don't cut the trees down. And we have this sense of, I was hoping that some other agency, some other organisation would protect us, and they haven't, so therefore life is unpredictable and dangerous. No, that's not the way to go. What we've got to come back to is say, so what did happen? What did you do? Now, I'll just give you one other little example, because I think this is very helpful when you're listening to each other. I was also in Kangaroo Island after the fires there. And a woman came up to me after I'd been talking about this, and she said, I feel really traumatised because I made a terrible decision. There was the fire there went through and came back and went through over several days. And then she said the fire went past, and then they came back and said, you really need to evacuate because it's very dangerous, the fire's going to come back. I said, no, it'll be fine, me and my daughter. But when the fire actually came, I thought, oh, this is quite different from what I thought. We're not safe here. And I got my daughter, and we drove to a hillside that had been burnt in the first pass of the fire. And I thought, this will be safe. When we got there, I realised this is not safe at all. And I thought, I've made a terrible decision. I feel so guilty. See how she goes into emotion? I feel so guilty. I put my daughter at risk. What can I do about my guilt? So what do we not know? We don't know what happened, do we? And we're left in the ad break. And somebody switches the television off. We just never know. And so if you hold your simple curiosity, follow interest in the story, trying to follow the story through, not what they tell you, but what they're trying to say, you'll pick when they're on track and telling you the story, and when they actually lose the track and they've gone off in somewhere else. And that's not satisfying your curiosity. So I said to her, what did you do? I couldn't do anything. I was paralysed. I was... okay. That's a very traumatic state for a mother to be in with it. She's got a teenage daughter. So I said, okay, and then what happened? I was just blah, 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 and then what happened? Well, my daughter said, well, shouldn't we go down the other end of the island like they told us to? And I said, all right, yeah, let's do that. And so she then describes how she drives the car onto this big long road. Now, 2 people died on that road in that fire. So she said, I drove onto the fire, I found the central line, I waited till the smoke cleared a bit, and then I floored it until I hit the next bank of smoke, and then I slowed right down and I crawled along until it was clear, and then I floored it again, and that way we made it. I said, fantastic, you actually made sure you didn't do what a lot of people do, which is run off the road, hit a stump, and die. Well done. But I panicked. Okay, what do you reckon you would have done if your daughter couldn't come up with that solution? I don't know. Well, think about it. What would have happened? Yeah, you are on the side of the hill. You know it's very dangerous. The fire's coming. What are you going to do? Well, I suppose I would have come up with it myself. Yes. How long do you reckon that would have taken? probably less than a minute. When you're in adrenaline mode, minutes are hours and seconds are minutes. Right? Now, she's left with really a false notion. She was very competent when she drove, wasn't she? And somehow or other, between the two of them, they did the job. I said, what will you do next time? Oh, I won't be there. So you've really learned something. You're a lot safer now. That's where she needs to focus, do you see? Bring her from looping that experience. Now, I don't know what the details of your experiences are, but you watch that. If you're going to sleep and you keep going back to certain moments with the sounds and so on, follow them all through until you come back to safety. How did you get through? When you come to moments where you wish you'd done something else, be kind to yourself and ask, why did I do that? I didn't know any better. What will you do now? Completely different. Right? Bring it into the present. And in this way, we can do it for ourselves. We can do it for each other in a conversation. Don't you feel you want to share your experience with others? Don't you want to talk about it? Because when you talk about it, you bring the human part in relation to the reptile part and start to digest it. Right? Digest it. And if you tell the story, you'll have to tell it many times if it's very highly aroused. And that will help you put it in the past. But you'll have to talk about different aspects. As time unfolds, you'll see different consequences of this. Now, this is sort of the trauma. And one of the things that people will describe is when they're very, very busy, as you have been for the last 6 weeks, or how many weeks it is, you haven't got time to think about that. So you just put it aside. Healthy people can just put a certain amount of bad experience aside and not do anything with it because you've got other things to do. So be aware that it's very normal that when you first start to have a break, settle down, take it easy, maybe go off out of the area for a little while. It's amazing how often people say, what a wonderful thing it is to get away, just be amongst people that are not involved in the disaster and have a bit of normality. How wonderful that is. But that's actually the time when some of the stuff that hasn't been attended will pop up, maybe as dreams, maybe as anxieties, whatever. Stop and think, how is this connected with what we went through here? And look for the connection. And that'll be best found by comparing notes as you go through the process. So now, I think there are three major problems. There's the trauma and there's loss. There will be loss, all sorts of losses. And losses are painful. But we have a mechanism to adapt to loss. It's called grief. It involves feeling sad. It involves thinking about things. It's painful. It's much easier to do if we are supported, comforted. We're not alone. We are aware that other people have lost a lot too. What I notice with bushfires, which in some ways are a kind of, dare I say, simple disaster, the house is gone, everything's completely destroyed, that's it. People who have houses flooded sometimes say, I wish it had just been all burnt, we could start again. I've got lots of stuff, but it's all twisted and distorted. But if you take that, it's not until people move into their new house that they start remembering all the things they had in their old house. Can you understand that? Heirlooms, precious things, memories, and all that sort of stuff. And they are very surprised that they start going through a painful period. I sort of think of it, they have to make an emotional inventory of what they've lost because they've been too busy to really worry about that. They've been dealing with adapting to daily tasks. So I think it's really important that if you're mixing with each other and so on, if someone's looking down, looking sad, or is a bit sort of grumpy and short-tempered, because if we're emotionally preoccupied, we'll get a bit grumpy. And perhaps they're really grieving a bit for something. They mightn't even know what they're grieving for. And I think to be aware that everyone will have their cycles. It would be nice if we all went up and down at the same time, but everyone's on their own rhythm. And I think to accept that. Now, when we're in adrenaline mode, we've got this simple judgmental thinking. We want everyone to be on the same. How come you're being miserable when I'm feeling a little bit better? You're bringing me down. I'm irritable. I don't want to talk to you. No. We've got to try and say, okay, this is complicated. We've got to hang together as a whole. Your best resource for recovery is the community. There's been a lot of research on this in the US, and they find that where communities take the initiative, as you have, and take care of themselves, they recover quicker, faster, and people come out of it with a stronger sense of community. This is part of what we call resilience, where people try this. They did research after the Japanese tsunami, comparing all the different prefectures. They have this index of what they call social capital. Social capital is relationships. Financial capital is money in the bank that you can draw out if you've got a problem you need to spend some money. Social capital is relationships, connections, knowing people, belonging, having a place. And under normal circumstances, you don't have to activate them. When something goes wrong, you can actually pick up the phone and talk to people. You can get advice, you can get information, get support. And they do this research where they take a measure of social capital in the community. They look at all sorts of things, like how many people turn out to vote in their voluntary voting system in Japan? How many people belong to organisations? How many people attend meetings of any sort? Church, clubs, etc., and so on. And they put all those stats together and they come up with a measure of social capital. The measure of social capital predicts how fast the recovery is, how many people return to these devastated communities, and they even predict the amount of death. The lower the social capital, the more people die in the tsunami. Why? Because in the high social capital, Bill has got a relationship with old Fred, or whatever his name would be in Japan, over the back fence, who can't walk too well, so that when the tsunami's coming, he jumps over the fence, puts him on his shoulders and carries him up the hill. And they don't wait for the government systems to work. Often they were broken by the initial wave. They all talk to each other. They have an informal network that, phone trees and so on that worked. They don't rely on anyone and say, we'll rely on ourselves. So that, there's very firm research now to back up what those of us who work in this area know, that communities who actually invest time and energy in being together do better. They recover faster. They have less consequences. So now you've got to be clear about that, because round about now to 6 months you're going to get very tired and you want to go to a meeting. No, I just want to go to bed. I'm just doing what I have to do. I don't want to talk to people on the phone. I can't be bothered going out to dinner with my friends. I just don't have the energy. But it's like any kind of creative recreational pursuit needs energy put into it, doesn't it? We need to invest energy to get a dividend of energy back. And I think it's really important to be aware that it is really important to put energy into your community, because it will come back, and it'll keep coming back right through the recovery process. Doesn't mean you have to go to everything, and you mightn't have the energy today, but you might go to another one. And what I've been saying to the community volunteer, that I think it's really important that there be social events going on throughout the year, the next couple of years, about all sorts of different things, because some people will be interested in, I don't know, a darts championship competition, and somebody else will be into a flower show and how to, somebody else will want to know how to mill timber or some. It doesn't matter, because nobody will be interested in everything, but no matter what. I had all sorts of people ring me up after Black Saturday and say, I'm thinking of doing this in the community, what do you think? And I say, have you got anyone interested? Yeah, we've got to do it. How did it go? Oh, good, we had a small group who came over, we had a great time. And so anything that brings us out together is knitting together the community. Under normal circumstances, our assumptions and our expectations, we know it's there. We don't actually need it, but it's nice to know it's there. After the disaster, we need it. And we want to create an opportunity where we just meet and talk regularly instead of having to say, hey, Rob, I keep having nightmares. Can I have a talk? No, we'd have to have a big thingo to do that, wouldn't we? Wouldn't it be nice if you were having a cup of tea and you say, you're looking tired, how are you sleeping? Oh, no, you're having these nightmares. You having nightmares too? I wonder if it's the wind. And that's going to go on for a while. I think, it would have been last winter when I was down in Malakuta. I was there about 3 years after the fires. I was down there sort of very early spring, and they said, when the weather turned cold and everyone lit their fires, right, we all had the heebie-jeebies with smoke drifting around the town. Now, you're going to have to go through that a number of times to say, okay, it's relaxed, it's just warm heat, You're going to have to go through that and reprogram your reptile brain. And you're going to do that by talking to each other and saying, I can relax, and laughing and saying, happening to you too, is it? Because one of the worst things is when we don't know that it's happening to everyone else, and we start to ask questions. Why? Because I've never been in this state before. So there are a lot of issues that start to happen to people that are unfamiliar. And then we get anxious. What's happening to me? What's wrong with me? Well, it becomes very important to get the information and realise, actually, we're all going through this. In the little town of Strathewen, after Black Saturday, they had a little... the first thing they asked the council for, was a little demountable building they could meet in. Because somebody, all the buildings were burnt there, had a lot of deaths, and somebody whose house survived said, anyone who's around on Thursday, come to my place for dinner. And so this became a weekly thing. They all brought a plate to dinner, whoever happened to be in town. As soon as the council could get in, they brought this demountable and they started to have the dinners there. And that would be a place where I would go every now and again and give a talk about some aspect of the recovery. They had people with all sorts of other bits of recovery. It was very important for that community to have natural scientists coming along and talking about how the bush would recover, because it looked as though it was never going to recover. And so on, all sorts of different sources of information. And several years down the track, one of the community leaders was saying how important these meetings had been. I think they still go, except they are once a month on a Saturday in the new sporting complex they've got. So this is a tradition. And he said, we had a very prominent member of our community who lost everything, like many of us, but she went to Queensland to live with relatives. And she came back for the first anniversary, and she came to the dinner, whatever the next one was, and she said, I was standing here watching her and I thought, she's strange. Look at her, she's very odd. And then as I watched her, I realised, wait a second, we were all like that after the fires. We were all a bit crazy. And then I realised, we're not like that anymore. We've moved on, but she hasn't. Now, that's a very clear example, but I've had a number of other examples of how people who've moved away from community don't sort of move through with community, which shows how important it is. And it was clear he hadn't realised how much work they've done until he saw this person. And, I think this is coming back to the idea that your greatest resource is your community. And how do you actually contribute to the planning and as to what you need? Now, I want to just finish off with a couple of things. I want to come back to the disruption. Your lives were full before it happened, weren't they? Or did you have lots of spare time in this tranquil rural paradise here? No, everyone's life is full up, isn't it? So you suddenly have a huge amount of recovery work to do. How do you fit it in? What are you going to let go of? Have a think about what have you stopped doing over the last few months? It's going to be time-wasting indulgences like going out to dinner with your friends or playing bowls or haven't got time for that nonsense. Or is it doing your hobbies? Is it being nice to your partner? Sitting quietly after dinner, having a cup of coffee, talking about the day? No, we haven't got time for that. We're going to do our insurance documents for weeks and weeks and weeks. Now, this is a sort of a slow meltdown of the structure of life, which you established because you enjoyed being together. You sat with the kids because you wanted to know about their day. But if you're haggard and tired and you've got all the worries, go to bed, kids. I've got a lot of stuff to do on my computer. And most kids will just get on and do it. So poor old mum and dad are really stressed. Okay, we better be good. Some will be difficult, but most will just settle down and do it. But if that's a couple of years, think about the age between 7 and 9, or between 12 and 14. It's a whole developmental stage, isn't it? And it's very important that we don't let that ride without stopping and thinking about it. Because kids get used to doing it themselves. It's no good talking to mum and dad about my worries. They've got worries of their own. So you come out the other end and the family's just lost some closeness. The relationship's not intimate because if you ask them, they haven't actually spent time. It's most important that you prioritise what I call quality of life, because I think people are at risk for, when they've got a disorganised lifestyle, of losing the things that give value and meaning to life, quality of life. And they suffer from a condition which I've invented. Well, I've invented the name for it. It's not a psychiatric illness. It's called degraded quality of life. And what does it look like? A few years down the track, you're just not happy. Your relationship's lost something intimate. You don't enjoy where you're living. You've lost motivation for your career and your plans. And so on and so forth. It predisposes people, because they're not having much enjoyment, to be more likely to get depressed and anxious. It predisposes people to have physical conditions. Did you know that loneliness is a risk factor for heart disease equal to smoking? And people I remember after Ash Wednesday, a woman wrote a poem in the newsletter where she talked about the blackness outside, the blackness inside at night in the little caravan, and the blackness in her heart as she lay in bed with her husband with their backs to each other, each feeling lonely. I've never been able to find it again. It was so poignant. We can be lonely right in the middle of a family if we're not sharing what's important. It's bad for our hearts. Now, I'm not going to frighten you all, have heart attacks, but it will translate ultimately into health impacts. Now's the time to start being aware of that. And I like to ask people to stop and think about, what did I used to do regularly without thinking about it as a routine that gave my life meaning, enjoyment, purpose? Am I still doing it? And if not, what have I replaced it with? And kick-start it again. Or maybe you won't want to go back to the same things, you want to do something else. I've been working with a man, a great big man who has a physical job, big strong man. He does very endurance athletics. And he had not a natural disaster, but a real tragedy in his family. And he was very down for quite a long time. He came in one day looking a lot brighter and he said, "Do you know what I've done? I've taken up knitting." And he showed me this picture of a beautiful sky blue cardigan that he'd knitted for his recently born granddaughter, embroidered with little flowers around the buttonholes. And he was beaming. Now, it doesn't matter what our joy is about, we need joy to get our brain working. And it energises us in exactly the places where we've used energy to do all the work we've done. Joy, pleasure, satisfaction, achievement. You know, I think he can't, in his grief state, he can't bring anything to a conclusion. It's just a long, hard road. But he can finish this cardigan and he can look at his granddaughter in it. You know, or we can do a gardening job or whatever. So I'd say in this environment where there's so much you can't control, actually just think about if there's something you would really enjoy and put energy, time and even maybe money into it. And it will be much better. There was a man who had the caravan park in Marysville, down near the river. And it wasn't completely destroyed in the fire, but it was severely damaged. And I gave my talk there one time, and I talked about when you're in that stress state and you can't make decisions, you can't prioritise, you can't plan, you can't get things organised, you become absolutely inefficient. It's because of what the stress does in our brains, right? We can't do the right, it'll be me, you, anyone. If we're in enough stress, we won't function very well. When I described that, he recognised, I usually know I'm on the right money when wives start to elbow their husbands and husbands start to, point to their wives. And he came up, next time I went up there, he came up to me after, he said, "When you came, I realised that was me. So I used some of the precious bushfire money to take my family to Bali." Do you remember when it was cheaper to go to Bali than to Sydney? We went up there for 3 weeks. He said, "When I came back, I kid you not, I achieved more in 3 days than I'd done in 3 weeks before we went." Because he had the energy and he had the clarity of mind as to what was important and he could carry through. So if you're actually finding it hard to actually achieve things, you're having trouble making decisions, prioritising what's important, take time out and waste time from the point of view of your recovery agenda. Waste time. That is, you let it go and you do something just for the hell of it. So I say that the important remedy for stress is simple. Pleasure. Put energy into doing whatever you enjoy. And leisure, which you need for the pleasure, don't you? Leisure is you don't have to do anything. What do you mean don't have to do anything? Don't you realise we've got all these problems? No, but you can carve out Sunday afternoon. It's leisure. I'm not going to do anything on Sunday that's of any value to anything except what I feel like. And do you see how that reverses the adrenaline process, which takes you out of yourself into the problems, and leisure returns your attention to yourself. And when you know what you're experiencing, you will do what you need, don't you? Won't you? I just feel like lying down and sleeping. Okay, Now I feel like going for a walk. Now I feel like talking to somebody. And you tune in. Because that's what we lose in this ongoing stress. We lose this connection with ourselves and with each other. So, now, just a couple of points. It takes a few years. And when people realise that and settle down and then make a plan to just plod through it, they do it much better than trying to achieve things and failing and trying and failing and feeling angry and so on. Try to manage the emotion. Try to realise there are innumerable different ways this impacts on people. And each of us have our own need. Respect your need and give yourself permission to actually follow it. Use services. Don't go for this business which says, oh, she's much worse off than me. That's not going... If you sacrifice your opportunity for somebody else, in Canberra they're not going to say, oh, Rob Gordon doesn't need anything, so we'll give that much more to somebody else. No, it's about if you've got certain requirements and certain, entitlements, you'll get it, right? It doesn't matter whether Rob takes it or not. So use the system, find out what you're entitled to and make use of it. That's why it's there. And we're a little bit shy of doing that. But if you've ever paid taxes, that's why you paid them. The government put them in a big bucket to give back to you in case of a disaster. They took it from you to give it back. Use it. And if you just work your way through, what we know is that in due course, most people get through it, and most people, if they've got the right support and they process it, can look back and say, that was a really hard time, but you know, there's a few things I've learned. I wish I didn't have to, but I think I'm wiser and better off. And as a community, we're better off. And that means really focusing on the problems and holding together and giving yourself time to work through it. And you can be confident that you will get through it. And if you're struggling, reach out, use the services. The services won't be supplied if there's not a need. Right? There may be a lag between saying we need this and getting something, but it's really important you let the community and the government, the council, the volunteers, ERV, anyone you can think of, let them know. I better stop talking for a while, hadn't I? I wonder if anyone's got a question.
Sorry, everyone was so quiet, I thought I'd ask. Royal Commission into bushfire recovery. I'm just wondering if you're suggesting that we shouldn't do that sort of reflective thinking. Is there a time when we should do that? Because quite a lot of us have got ideas about things that could have gone wrong. Maybe we're in that angry mode still, not sure.
Yeah.
But we do need to reflect on ways that we can do it better. Absolutely. How we can work better, yep. Both in terms of what was happened, but also in terms of anything coming up. Yep. I just wonder if you could reflect on the art of reflection in amongst all of what you've been saying about the emotions.
Anything like that, inquiries, reports, etc., are ways of taking our experience and doing something with it. That's enormously beneficial. Isn't it? The feeling that if we've suffered unnecessarily, the fact that it'll be recorded and if somebody reads the report, will lead to a better system. There's no question that happens. It was so clear the difference between Victoria after Ash Wednesday and all the other states for a long time until they started to have big fires. There was about 10 years where you could see that Victoria had learnt a lot of things that the other, because it was so big. And so, by all means, plough it into that. But I'd just say this, don't hang your recovery on an outcome, right? Because the outcome is subject to lots of things that have nothing to do with your recovery. Politics, money, other agendas, I think it's a trap to say, I will feel this was worthwhile if I can get this happen. That's out of your control. What you control is your circumstances and how you see things and what you make of them. But yes, so if you have an inquiry, presumably there will be some kind of an inquiry, and if there isn't, maybe as a community you can get together and record your experience. I've got a whole shelf at home of books that have been written and collected together from all sorts of communities about their disaster experience. And it's very beneficial for everyone to tell their story. I think what they often miss is telling the story of the recovery and what they did to help each other through those difficult times, the 6 months and the 12-month anniversary and so on. It's much more focused on the drama. But that will be a very interesting record and will be very helpful for the future. Yeah, thank you. Yes. How to help the children. So the first thing I would look at is whether you are getting indications of trauma with the children, which would come from the same sort of alarm of kids are frightened when the wind is blowing. And we have to do the same with them. We have to teach them how this wind is different from that wind. To do that, we've got to sort it out ourselves. But you'll also find that with children, the shattering or the breaking of assumptions about weather, for instance, that sometimes you think, we might have lived here for 20 years. We can think back to a few large storms. We know what happened in the Dandenongs for you. They don't know any of that. They just know the world went absolutely crazy. They thought the world was a nice place, and suddenly it's absolutely terrifying. I heard the story of children running home from the swimming pool, I mean that. I don't know anything about it than what a couple of people have said. That'd be something to say. What should we do next time if a disaster's happening and kids are at the swimming pool? Telling them all to go home doesn't sound to me like the best option. So, but probably people have never had to deal with that before. So again, kind of community for the adults, community policies or whatever. But with the children, we've got to be aware. I would say, from my experience, if there's any significant change in your child since then, don't expect it to have a big label saying storm, trees. They might be clingy. They might engage in a process we call regression. They go back to being younger. Not just sucking their thumb, but a teenager showing they actually want a lot more cuddles, or maybe teenagers, I don't know whether they're like that up here, but down where I live they can be obnoxious. So they start saying, no, I'm not going to make my bed, I want you to make it. And if you think back 4 years, you probably would have made it, right? Because you were more actively taking care of them. And in that way, often teenagers will act in such a way that they annoy the parents because they're being more dependent. Just think about that as whether they've regressed back because they need more emotional comfort. Not talking about the storm. Don't go on about that all the time, they'll say, but they just need to have a re-establishment of security and comfort. And so when you get that and you actually change your pattern and go back to doing what you would have done a few years before, sit on their bed at the end of the day, before the storm, they said, what are you doing? Yeah, finished, I want to get on my phone, or whatever. But, just putting more time to be with them. And as a strategy, just give them your full attention. That's all. Just be with them. and see what happens. Another thing that might happen is that they show patterns of insecurity that have nothing to do with trees and wind. So there's an overall sense of insecurity. They will often generalise from wind and trees to any kind of natural event. You know, strange sunset colour. What's going on? It's the bushfire. Whatever. You'd have to help them re-establish their sense that they understand what's going on in nature and they can predict what's happening. And they will also struggle with the 6-month dip because they're tied to us adults as we get tired. Some of them will just back off. Others will get demanding just when we wanted to be left alone. And it's really important, I think, to compare notes. And if you don't have the energy to look after them, drop something else and give it to them. Forget about something else. Slow the recovery, the moving of the trees and so on. Slow all that down. That doesn't matter. What matters is that when you come out the other side, you enjoy life, you're healthy, your family's together, your kids are on track. And the research from kids with disasters shows that they often end up being more serious and responsible, a bit wiser, you could say, than their thoughtless peers. And we could do with a bit of thoughtfulness. Could well be, yeah. And that'll depend, what's happening at school. Where's the local high school? You got one here? Yeah, great. So the people in the high school will know exactly what happened. Sometimes there's a problem when disaster-affected kids go to a high school where the staff were not involved. They haven't experienced it. So that's good. And I know the education department will have a whole system of support. Yeah.
Rob, I know a lot of work is being done at clearing, but we're still constantly reminded of disaster, like trees have been lopped and so forth.
Yeah.
You're seeing it all the time.
Yeah.
How do you cope with that?
Grieve what you've lost and celebrate the growth. Watch how incredible nature is at regrowing. And because there's going to be no shortcut to that. I think it took, the Christmas Hills at the back of my place. It came down halfway down half the Christmas Hills and went off to Steele's Creek. And you could see all, burnt trees there for probably about 10 years. Now you wouldn't know. Things have grown. So you've got to wait. Around Strathewen, the fire was so intense as it went on the uphill, with the wind uphill. It was so intense that it totally burnt everything right into the soil. And after about the second winter, nothing grew at all. The second winter, all this lichen and goo grew. And it was lime green and sort of purpley coloured. There were these streaks going up amongst the black trees. Did you see it? I thought, my God, this looks like Mordor. Now, people thought this is when Strathewen got in the naturalists saying, is this ever going to recover? And they he took them on a walk and he said, do you see that there? That's the first beginnings of this will come. So now it's a vibrant area of regrown bushland. But you probably need to have a time frame on that we don't normally have. Some people said after Black Saturday, I won't live long enough to see the trees replaced the way I loved them. well, you'd better start loving something different, wouldn't you? Attach yourself to a different, which means you've got to let go. That's how it was. Now I'm going to really watch these things grow and enjoy them. Just think about celebrating what you had, let it go, and start to enjoy something else. It's not easy, but that's what I'd be working with. Yeah. Yep.
What do you do when you see someone who's not doing that and they're coming on your side and feeling
Yep.
how do you help?
This is a very important question, comes up all the time, because you may be the only person that really knows how that person is. And we'd like to say, oh, they should go to see the mental health, but they're probably not going to. What I would suggest is you try and get alongside them. Don't try and solve their problem, because they won't see a solution. Just try and get alongside them and give them the feeling that you enjoy seeing them. That's a really important thing for a depressed person. They know they're miserable. They know a lot of the time they're a burden. But if you just do it repeatedly, it's a bit different if you think there's a suicide risk. Then I think you should talk to somebody in the community and somebody in one of the systems, find out who you can talk to. Very often a very valuable thing that people can do is use a consultation with a mental health professional to talk about your concern about that person, to help you work out, how serious is it, and also help you think about a strategy of what to do. Sometimes they've set up opportunities for the mental health professionals to be available to the informal supporters. It's a very cost-effective way of getting the service out. But I'd say just show interest in them. Just try and invite them to come with you to a community meeting, or take it slowly. Don't give them the feeling that you feel sorry for them. You're going to try and cheer them up, but just be interested. Be there. Yeah, and give them feeling that they're important, that you enjoy. You've been thinking about them and wondering how they're going, and so on. Yeah. Practical assistance can often be very helpful. Take them a few veggies, or tell them about something going on. Good question. Thank you. Yeah. She, pardon? Yes. Survivor guilt. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So this is a really helpful way of putting the other side to the community connectedness, isn't it? It's very important we preserve privacy. Privacy. I've realised that without privacy, you lose intimacy. We see this when people live in each other's houses. And I think the kind of gesture that she's made, come and live with us, is a very heartfelt one, perhaps motivated by guilt. But I've heard so many stories where it doesn't work out. I hadn't heard that one, but 7 years after Ash Wednesday, I did a presentation to school psychologists. And I didn't know much at the time, but I was telling what I knew. And I noticed this woman up the back who was absolutely riveted on every word. And when we had a break, she came up and said, "This is the first time I understood what happened to my family. Their house burnt down. The neighbour's house, who were an older couple, their kids had left home, survived. The neighbour said, 'Move in with us.' They had a whole area without being used. Seemed like a good idea. She said after a certain amount of time, she wasn't comfortable in somebody else's house. How would you like to live with your neighbour on the left for the next 18 months? I'm sure some people have got nice neighbours on the left, but they might be nice people, but we don't want to live with them. We have different lifestyles. She said to her husband, "We'll move out. We'll get a caravan like everyone else. I just need my own space." So they said to this couple, "Look, I think we'll move it. We won't hear of it. Don't be stupid. No, of course, no, we've got all the facility. You've got hot and cold running water. And no, we won't hear about it." And this happened about 3 times over the next 6 months. Why does she get... She's a psychologist. You'll say, well, that probably explains everything. But her husband was a school principal. They're both well-educated people. Why don't they know what they need and have the ability to stick up for it? Because they've never been through this before. They don't know what's really the right thing. So they get talked out of it and the convenience and the comfort. Eventually she says to her husband, "Order the caravan to be brought on Saturday morning. We'll tell them at breakfast they won't be able to do anything about it because it'll be coming." So he tells them, "We're going, thanks very much, you've been very kind. We don't want to be inconvenienced, so we've got the caravan coming in about half an hour." "I won't hear of it," says, I call her Mrs. Do-Gooder. And she says, "Where are you getting from?" "Ring them up, Harry, and cancel it," she says to her husband. And he does. And they stay there until their house is built. And she says, now, 7 years later, I can say, my husband and I are together, but we're just good friends. Is that a tragedy? My 14-year-old daughter at the time, she's now 21, 7 years later. She's okay, she's gone to uni, she's living in college, but we hardly ever see her. Because what she did was she went into her peer group. That's where she got the intimacy and support. The one I feel sorry for is my 7-year-old son at the time. He was a happy, outgoing, high-achieving kid, loving school. Now he is a lonely, unhappy, isolated 14-year-old who just watches television all day and is failing at school. You see, this boy's whole trajectory of development has gone off the rails. Why? They lost intimacy. What do we do when we're intimacy? We fight, don't we? We sort things out and then we make up. And we be affectionate and say those things that we'd never be caught dead saying in public to each other. Affectionate, you know? All of the fabric of private, intimate communication. They lost that. They didn't realise they were losing it. Because they've fallen outside of their normal framework of routine life. And they're terribly busy for years, aren't they? And then when they stop and think, they've lost it. It's too late. So I could tell you lots of stories like that. So it's really important, I think, and that's why I think it's so important to just talk like this and sort of lay out the issues and help people look after themselves. So claim privacy by keeping boundaries. You need your family privacy. It's all right to have people there for a short time, but what do they say? How long does it take a fish to start smelling or something? And then you won't really resolve their problem by ruining your recovery, will you? Enjoy being in your house that survived, which is luck, pure luck, isn't it? Enjoy that, and you can give to the community rather than have a terrible experience. That's a tragedy.
The Shelburne complex fires were deliberately picked. No one was ever convicted of that.
Yeah, and I was recently contacted by media because one of the arsonists was recently released from jail. And see, there are a whole lot of things around a disaster like that. Someone was responsible and so on. And it never feels like they got what they deserved, does it? How do you make a connection between the punishment and what people lost? And some people lost their lives. So I think the only thing we can say is don't hang your recovery on legal procedures. Your recovery is your personal journey out of it. And there will be things that are unfair, unjust, and so on, or they won't feel as though we've got what we deserve, or we don't feel as though messages have been properly relayed or lessons have been learnt. That's actually all out there. You've got to really make your recovery dependent on how you establish the lifestyle that will allow you to live the kind of life you want to live. And that means accepting what we can't control. We can't control courts, judges, lawyers, politicians, etc., etc. And I think otherwise people keep emotionally engaged with something that is out of control, and that, I think, eats away at us. I think we've got to let it go. It's very hard, but I think talking together, offloading, venting to each other and swearing about, things that aren't fair, it helps us to kind of let go and start to move through. It's not a very satisfactory answer. When I was at the going up to the Canberra fires, I went up a number of times over several years, and had all these big pine forests in Canberra. There were three people who lost their houses, who would sit up the back, and as I was leaving, they would actually emerge out of the shadows, and they'd say to me, "Now, it's all very well you to talk about all this recovery stuff, but the government's the fault. They should build our houses because of their pine forests." And no. Now, they actually said the same thing to me for 3 years, and then I stopped going. They didn't move at all. And this is what's been found in the research in the United States. People who focus on blame, anger, etc., don't really recover. They don't really accept and move on. And so I think that how do we get help to move over something that just feels wrong and unjust? Well, I think if we refocus our attention, we vent, feel as though it's okay to feel like this, but we refocus our attention to what we can control and work on that. And then maybe if we can make submissions to government processes, let's do that too.
Thank you very much, Rob. Just want to take a moment to thank Rob for coming tonight.